yes, I will switch off my MC hat and turn into moderator Jeff for this next panel. So as our world grows increasingly digital and interconnected, the march towards smart manufacturing has never been more relevant or crucial. And today we bring together a diverse group of experts from both small and large corporations to shed light on a key aspect of this movement: collaboration. The pandemic exposed outdated and siloed nature of supply chains and kind of highlighted by extreme demand fluctuations and distribution challenges. In response, many of the industry pivoted towards digital transformation, and this demand increased data sharing and collaboration. So the panelists I have joining me here today are truly experts in the field, and I'm excited to learn what they are going to have to say. So we have Rick Van Dyke, who's the Senior Director of Supply Chain Engineering for PepsiCo North America, and has over 30 years experience in automation, OT controls, and site IT systems in manufacturing. We also have Larry Megan, who is the head of digital for Baldwin Richardson Foods, who's responsible for the company's digital transformation agenda, as well as its IT and OT systems. We have Mike Tomasco, who is the Vice President, and he has been leading the organization's digital transformation since 2016. And last but not least, we have Matthew Lang, who's the Senior Director of Digital Manufacturing Engineering within Corporate Engineering at Eli Lilly, supporting the manufacturing organization globally. So today we're going to break our discussion into three different categories: what collaboration looks like, lessons learned, and strategies for success. So we'll start with, what does collaboration, good collaboration, look like? Mike, as someone who's responsible for leading the program for digitalization across manufacturing supply chain operations in a big company with over 35 manufacturing sites, with over 300 suppliers that ship to more than 50 billion doses of medicine and vaccines to over 181 countries, tell us what good collaboration looks like, and can you describe it?
Jeff, it's complicated. I think it's the way to look. I wore the manufacturing uniform today as well, so everyone can see with the vest. But what does good look like in collaborating across a large supply chain like that? It's all about having the data flow and understanding from the time a raw material comes into your facility to the time it goes through your supply chain and comes out as a finished product, that you understand what's going on with any given product that you might be making. In our industry, a single product is not made in a single location. There's usually 2 or 3 facilities involved in that manufacturer, from creating an API or drug substance capability through a intermediate drug product and ultimately through packaging and getting the finished good out the door. So at any given step along the way, you have 2 or 3 manufacturing facilities in that process. Inside your company, you have the hundreds of suppliers that provide the raw materials. So having transparency in the quality of those materials is extremely important, because the quality of the materials changes what goes on through the process. And if we have insight into how those materials are coming in and we can trust those signals, there are things we can do in manufacturing to be more efficient and get through our processes better, and then ultimately provide our drugs to patients high quality and quickly.
And that is no easy task, and there's a lot that we can learn from you. So, Larry, with your company being in its early stages of digital transformation, how do you envision digital collaboration for BRF across its supply chain?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So we're about a 500-person company in upstate New York, and so I'm kind of happy to be able to carry the flag here for the medium-sized manufacturers as part of this discussion. So, you know, for us, we certainly have the same issues that were just mentioned with respect to, hey, it'd be great if we understand the quality of our raw materials as they're coming in the door, or even before they come in the door, so that we can adjust our formulations and so forth for that. So that's important for us, but let me speak more on the other side of it. I'll say in SME terms, we're basically a tier 1 supplier. We're providing, in our case, liquid food additive ingredients to names that you know of, McDonald's and Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. And so for us, ideal in the collaboration space is being able to see from our customers, from their stores, from their distribution centers. Where are inventory levels at? How can we, more in real time, at the end of the day, they look to us to be a reliable supplier, like many of you large companies will look upon your supply chain partners. And we want to be that. We want to use that as a means of competitive advantage. And so really, how can we get better insight into what's in their facilities so that we can react accordingly and bring those signals all the way back through our manufacturing and procurement processes on the raw ingredient side.
So Rick, your whole world is supply chain. Can you tell me what really needs to be in place for successful collaboration to take place?
Yes, Jeff, I can, or try to
Awesome.
at least. When I'm looking at it or thinking about it, at least on the Frito-Lay side of the business, and I'm thinking about collaboration itself and what needs to be in place, is I think it's important as we talk about some of the things that have already been stated, but you start to think through what problem is it that you're trying to solve that needs to be solved from a collaboration standpoint that's really going to make an impact. And then what's important from that standpoint then is that you get all the stakeholders and all the different functional people within your organization and your supplier engaged in terms of that problem that you're trying to solve and what's critical to make that happen. And then I think you'll be in a position from a technical standpoint and also getting engaged with the technical community and be able to make that happen. I found that when you kind of get all those pieces together and they're right on point, both in problem to solve and the way to solve it, that it helps accelerate the success of that collaboration and what the solution would be.
Great answer. So Matt, let's switch gears. Knowing you have a big focus on the technology side and the data side of things, what does good look like from an infrastructure and data integration standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think it all starts at the bottom, at the plant floor, and it might not be our plant floor. It might be the plant floor of a supplier or a contract manufacturer, another organization. It doesn't matter where in the supply chain process it is. It's enabling that data flow throughout the infrastructure. And I think when we look at today's world, when you want to actually share data, it's all about getting it up to the cloud at some point. But again, you have to have that connectivity all the way down through an edge platform, all the way up through your plant network, all the way up to the cloud to be able to get that data there. But having just those systems in place to do data flow alone isn't enough. What you really need to focus on is figuring out, okay, how do we get the right context with that information, with that data, so we can turn it into information and make it usable. So from an infrastructure standpoint, you need tools that allow you to do data cataloging, that allow you to add context, that allow you to integrate data sets together so that whoever's using that data or you want to share it with actually can understand the data without having to be a deep guru to be able to dive in and know what every single bit means within that data set. So from an infrastructure and data perspective, it's that end-to-end data flow with the right context and cataloging in place so that it can actually be usable information.
For a fairly simple question, these were very different answers to show you what collaboration can look like from a good standpoint. Let's switch gears to our next topic, which is lessons learned. So what have you learned through doing all this? Rick, we'll start with you. I know you like the slogan, fail fast and cheap. Tell me what it means and how it applies to supply chain collaboration.
Yes, what it means is, a lot of what we're trying to take on is very complex, and it can be pretty big and massive. So, and I talked about before in terms of trying to be on point, both in terms of what you're solving and the technology, which can be very difficult to do. So, a good way to approach that is to, maybe break it down into some critical components or pieces, and then be able to go after those and go quick, and maybe in a proof of principle pilot. Let's not get into, was it pilot purgatory? I think that was talked before. So there's not that. You don't want to do that. So you want to be very intentional and kind of know how that pilot fits with, kind of the end in mind. And then what I found is that you'll learn, through that process, and you can make adjustments to the play, and then it will help you proceed to the next step. And that way you're providing value and also, have successful solutions that, people are happy about, which gives you momentum to go to the next thing, the next kind of capability you want to deploy.
Well, I love that slogan, and it's easy to remember, so I'm going to be using it more often. So Matt, let's go back to you. Let's keep on with the data integration sharing side. What has been the biggest challenge that you had in what you just talked about, and what did you learn by solving it?
Yeah, the biggest challenge by far has been actually making sure that the data that you're generating has the right context to be meaningful. And how do you actually contextualize data from a variety of different assets or manufacturing processes, let alone within one company, it can be a big enough challenge, but then when you start talking about collaborating wider across multiple companies and you have all different terminologies, even different base level data that is available. And so what we found is if we can get the right strategy and standards in place from the start, that all go back to what problem are we actually trying to solve, then you figure out what data do we need, we can put a structure and in context and framework and data model behind that, and once you can fit your data into that model and pattern and follow that standard, now all of a sudden you open a door to where, like I mentioned before, you don't need data gurus or these deep experts to figure out what the data means. It empowers your whole organization to get access to that data set and to start using it, which then just really, it builds on itself and it opens up the door to many, many more use cases, and you start to see that real churn and that cycle, that flywheel really start to spin from that data use.
I like that. Larry, what have been some of the challenges in trying to drive digital transformation at a smaller company, or as you called a mid-sized company?
Well, you know, for us, obviously there's a couple of key things. One is you don't have the depth, and for context, I've spent most of my career in what's now a Fortune 100 company. So I've seen it from both sides, as a large company as well as a small company, right? So you don't have that depth of expertise. So when people talk about, hey, you need to build an API or you need to do this kind of stuff, I look around and I'm trying to find the person who's going to build an API for me, right? So I think you have to have, like I say, the depth of expertise is a challenge. So you really have to figure out what are those really critical capabilities you need within the organization, specific to your organization, that are really differentiators, and really what else can you commoditize. I think that's one issue. And the other one, and you know, really what the CESMII group and others are doing around trying to do standardization of data structures is really important. So like if you're like us, we have 4 kids, if you start getting more of those like doctor portals, you have to go into the doctor's portal and put in your information, and you have a big family, and now we have 15 doctor portals that we have to get data into, right? And it's the same information 15 different times. We could be faced with the same problem, right? McDonald's wants to see this, and Starbucks wants to see this, and Dunkin' wants to see this. And if there's no standardization, then as a smaller manufacturer, you haven't made us more efficient, you've actually created a more difficult environment for us to work in, right? So standardization and contextualization of that data is super important for what we want to be able to accomplish.
Good thing we have an organization who's focused on helping with that, right? So, Mike, last for this subject. As someone further along in their supply chain collaboration strategy, what has been the most difficult part, especially something you may have underestimated in its difficulty or complexity?
I think I would build off of what Larry just said. We're part of the problem in our supply chain by demanding certain types of information from our partners. And if I were a contract manufacturer and a Pfizer, a Lilly, an Amgen is asking me for different sets of data, we're perpetuating the issue. We want to see certain types of things. So one of the things we've learned is we want to be a partner of choice. So we want to follow standards. We want to be able to facilitate bringing together these groups instead of trying to force our desires and will for data upon others. So if we can make it easier for you to collaborate with us, you're going to want to work with us more than maybe someone else. So if we become that partner of choice and make it easy to work with, that's really the biggest lesson we can learn. And then having the right incentive system to facilitate that type of collaboration. It's got to be built into the contracts and the way we work.
So I'll follow up with that one a little bit. What was the most difficult part of that?
Yeah, getting people internally to buy into the idea. So I think it's a long journey. It's a supplier by supplier journey as well. I think you have to start with your top few suppliers and work together towards what common ground you can find so that you can try this out. Fail fast if it's not going to work, and then try something else to get it to work.
Makes sense. All right, let's switch from lessons learned to strategies for success. Matt, we'll start with you. Knowing that OT data is notoriously difficult to collect and make sense of, you've already talked about this, what advice would you give to make the process as easy as it can be for others to do?
Yeah, I think the key is to simplify however you can. And so it goes back to the fundamentals of figuring out what problem are you really trying to solve. to solve that problem, what data, what OT data do you really need, and go after and figure out what the simplest way is to collect that data. When you think about OT data, it is complex because there's so much of it and it doesn't always have the right context. But if you look at it, really we have, generally it's time series data and event data, kind of transactional type data. If you break it into those two buckets and figure out for your company what's the best way to capture those two types of data, and then again you go back to what data do I really need to solve the problem at hand, then you can go and you can collect that data, add the context that you need with it to make it usable. So again, it's that foundation. It all goes back to making sure you're very clear about what problem are you really trying to solve to identify what the key data is that you actually need to get, and not get lost in this huge, just massive data that we do have from our plants.
That makes sense. Rick, what advice do you have for companies building their supply chain collaboration strategy?
Well, I think it's a little bit what was said already, but making sure that as you're thinking about the strategy, kind of where are you today with your capabilities, and what capabilities do you need that are going to have the biggest impact? And then also, I guess from a systems and architecture standpoint, kind of have an idea of the end in mind. And then I would say you've got to switch on to some tactics that enables you to solve the immediate problems that are right in front of you, that provides value to the organization, and helps get some successes under your belt. And what that's going to do is then you're going to learn too on any adjustments you need to make on your strategy, but it also garners support from the organization to invest more, to accelerate more to get to your strategy. So that's really my advice.
So I'll follow up on that one a little bit. What would be some specific things that you would look for in a successful strategy for this?
Good question. I think that that it rings true. I think if you have to be able to talk about the strategy in business terms, and it has to connect with the organization so that they get it. And then they're ready to listen to the specific funding request or project you want to go do, because if it's a fair amount of money or whatever, they're going to want to understand, is this all, or is there more coming, and how does this fit? So I think really having that kind of business understanding and have it in that language is what's critical.
Thanks. So Mike, what strategy do you give for companies who have very complex manufacturing and supply chain operations? I don't know if you know any that have that. What would you give, and they aren't sure where to start?
That's a really great question, Jeff. I think the best way to look at this is, what problems do you have today? What problems are you trying to solve? And choose one. Don't choose 10 things. Don't try to solve the world's problems. Look inside, look at your flow of product, and say, I have a bottleneck here, or I have a collaboration issue with this specific supplier. In our case, maybe a glass vial supplier is providing vials that break on our line. Maybe we can do something in that interaction to understand, why is that happening? Are we set up inefficiently and causing the breakage? Is there something wrong with their raw materials that's causing that to happen on our line? So if you look into a specific issue, you then can set the precedent for how you work with other suppliers. If you try to solve all your problems at once, you're just going to spin your wheels. I don't know if anyone else here has seen something similar. Yeah, it looks like yes. So pick one thing, a use case, try it out, and then build from there. Build on success. Success breeds success. There's another slogan for you, Jeff.
I like that one. I've heard that one, but I like it. So I'm going to follow up on that one a little bit. So that seems more like a bottom-up approach, identifying specific use cases that are pain points and kind of building from there. Do you recommend doing anything at the same time, from kind of a top-down at the same time? If so, what might you start on that subject from a top-down approach?
I think from a top-down, it's all about storytelling, right? So when we think about gaining investment to do some of these projects, the first thing you're always asked is, what's the ROI? And sometimes there isn't a direct ROI that you can just conjure up from thinking about what problem is you're trying to solve. So you have to get into telling a story about the flow of information, and if you obtain more information earlier in a process and you can run some analytics on it, do you think maybe you can make a better decision down the line? And if you have that storytelling at the top, it starts to build trust in people that even if you don't have a clear-cut business case, there's a kernel of a good idea there that maybe you'll get enough money to go explore, and then you can go try something. And then if that doesn't work, that's part of the story. You learn something, you build it back into the story, and then you keep going. And you just have to keep iterating. Change takes a lot of persistence. And oftentimes at the top, they want to know what's going to save me money tomorrow. Sometimes these things save me money a year from now, not tomorrow. And you have to build that into the system of belief in what story you're trying to tell.
And that is a delicate balancing act, I am sure, as someone who's been there. So I'm actually going to put our panelists and see how well they do on their feet, because we actually ended ahead of time. And so I'm going to ask a question that they are not prepared for. Let's see how well they do with this one.
Wait, were we supposed to be prepared, Jeff?
So I want to focus on the organizational side. We've talked about strategies, lessons learned, even technology on this. I want to talk about organizationally. This could be structurally, this could be culturally, could be values, principles, it could be any process related to the organizational side, not supply chain or manufacturing. What do you see as some of the big organizational things that can be done that made an impact in allowing this to work? So Rick, we'll put you on the spot and start with you first.
Well, as you were starting to introduce your question, what I started to think about was how different everybody's organizations are and companies are. And so I would start with there isn't a one-size-fits-all at all with that. So, I think that, as you look to trying to get started, understanding your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, then you can identify what those kind of big things, are, from your perspective to be successful. If I take it back to me, all I can speak to is kind of my personal experience, right? So, and PepsiCo is a very affiliation-based company, in terms of how we work versus maybe a process-oriented company. So that's one key thing to understand is how do you garner that affiliation to go get accomplished, and then therefore, what do you need from the organization to make that happen? Definitely a tight partnership with IT was extremely important, and I think I feel like we've accomplished that. I'd say we've got solutions where, my organization and then the head of IT for supply chain, you kind of can't tell the team members apart or whatever. It's we're trying to go and solve things. And then the other part is making sure whatever you're solving is connected to the business strategy and the business need, and you've got those pieces in place. So I think, from my standpoint, since we're not process-oriented, it's not necessarily an organizational structure. Is it important? Is more of a alignment and buy-in to what it is.
It's still organizationally related. That's why I wanted to focus more on the people side, the company side. Do you have?
Yeah, can I jump in? I mean, for me, I think to build upon what Rick said, culture. So you have to have a culture of belief. So when we're doing our digital transformation, specifically on the manufacturing side of things, we have a culture of no, right? No, you can't do that. No, you can't make that change. I happen to be the IT guy up here on the panel. Thanks for your help. We've got this covered is basically what we get all the time. What happens when production goes down? I get these questions every day. The culture of no has got to be what's stopped. It's more of we need the culture of how can I help the group or the company make this happen? Because when we're all in this together and we have a belief that we can make it happen, you actually can. And for us in our company, that starts at the top. Our CEO believes that things can happen. Therefore, we all have to get behind that belief system and try to make good stuff happen. If you don't have that in your culture, if it is just the culture of no, we have plants that'll go down in the level of maturity because they're not keeping up with the times. If you have a plant leader who believes as well, it makes it so much easier to bring that culture through, and then the innovations come through and help the operation out. But it's always that mid-tier of management that's responsible for the day-to-day, get product out the door, that has the hardest time because you're messing up their system. They know how to get stuff out the door today, but if you come in with a new innovation, it's challenging. And it's fair to say, I get it. If that was my job, I'd be afraid too. But you got to believe that for the long term, the good of the company, you're doing the right stuff.
Changing a culture of no to a culture of belief. And I would
Ted
argue,
Lasso, believe.
There you go. I would add that's kind of the precursor to a culture of innovation. You're building the foundation for it. Larry, what would you like to add?
Yeah, just to build on that. So I'm in a fortunate position of being in a smaller company. So So I report to our CEO, and she looks at me and says, no, we're going to use digital transformation as a means of competitive advantage. I don't know exactly how, that's your job to figure it out, but it starts there, right? And there is, for all of this stuff, you know, people talk about ROIs and all that, but there does have to be that sort of foundational belief that this is where the world is headed. I mean, you can see it in your personal life, pick up your cell phone, so translate to your business life, and you have to be able to willing to build those foundational principles in your systems and in your people. We really haven't talked about the people side of it all, but you also have to have, if you're going to use digital transformation as a source of competitive advantage, that means that our people have to have a higher digital quotient, whatever that means, than our competitors do. And how are we going to help them get there? And really, how we're going to build that capability in lockstep as we build the technology platforms.
Great answer. Matt, bring her home.
Yeah, I agree. It all goes back to what we're talking about here is culture. And it's having the culture that sets the foundation and expectation that we are going to use digital transformation, data, technology to be able to drive improvement. But in order to do that too, it goes back to having the vision and the strategy of what does that mean and look like, right? It's not just say, we're going to use data, we're going to use digital and leave it at that. You need leadership and organizations that are going to set that vision, create the culture and then an expectation that says, here's how we're going to do this, to then be able to go and enable your employees to take advantage of these tools and technologies to drive change.
Well done, guys, and we are perfect on time. Exactly. Everyone, give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much for being up here.